Hi, good evening. Welcome along to the Transfer Show. Dharmesh Sheth and James Savundra are here to take us through the day's top stories, and there are loads of them. And once again, strikers are dominating the agenda. Alexander Isak's future is far from certain, but he was back at Newcastle's training ground today. We'll discuss him. And Darwin Núñez was on the score sheet for Liverpool against Athletic Club. But was it his last goal for the club? Alexander Isak signs for somebody. Where are we with his future?
He was pictured at the Newcastle training ground this morning, spent 3 hours inside the training ground. This is the first time that he's been there since he headed to Spain, headed to his old club Real Sociedad for a personal training camp. And this comes just over 48 hours since Newcastle rejected a bid of over £100 million from Liverpool. We understand he was in the training ground receiving treatment for a thigh injury. Newcastle do not want to sell him. They value him at £150 million. Eddie Howe and the first team squad, they weren't there today. They're still recovering from an overnight flight back from South Korea. I thought it was fascinating what Eddie Howe had to say before they departed South Korea. He said, "You have to earn the right to train with us. The player has a responsibility here to be part of a team and part of a squad. You have to act in the right way." I wonder if this has anything to do with the fact that Isak told Newcastle last month he wanted to explore his options in this transfer window. Newcastle won't sell Alexander Isak if they don't feel his valuations met, and crucially, if they don't have a replacement lined up. They take on Aston Villa in their first game of the Premier League season next weekend. Their current only fit striker they have is William Asula, who scored one Premier League goal.
Posed the question at the top of the programme. Darwin Núñez, you told us earlier he'd scored this evening. Is that going to be his last goal for the club?
Potentially. What's actually fascinating as well, Liverpool have released their team. They're playing at 8 o'clock as well. There's two friendlies taking place against Athletic Club. They won the first one 4-1. Darwin Núñez scored within the first few minutes. They've named the team for the second match, and it's very clear looking at this is going to be very close to Liverpool's starting 11 for the start of the season. They take on Crystal Palace on Sunday in the Community Shield, and then Bournemouth live on Sky Sports next Friday. And Hugo Ekitike looks like he's going to be the striker for that first match. Darwin Núñez clearly already is a second choice striker at Liverpool. There's been interest from Italy. We now understand AC Milan have made initial contact with Liverpool around the signing of Darwin Núñez. They're trying to sign him. Contact has now been made between the clubs, yet to make an offer. There are other interested clubs, including Al Hilal from Saudi Arabia. We've been reporting since the start of the window that Núñez's preference would be to move to Spain or Europe rather than move further afield to somewhere like the Saudi Pro League. Al Hilal haven't made a bid yet. They're monitoring the situation. He's still got 3 years left on his contract, and when he signed 2 years ago, it was a deal that could rise to £85 million. Liverpool have done very well over the course of the last 18 months in terms of selling players for very high fees, making profits on players. Darwin Núñez is a player who you'd think more likely than not they're going to make a loss on. If they're trying to sign Alexander Isak in this window as well, I think it shows you where Arne Slot sees Darwin Núñez.
Right, so they need a replacement on board. Will that replacement be Yoane Wissa, Dharmesh?
This one has been quite an unsavoury episode throughout this transfer window. What we do know is that Brentford are expecting Yoane Wissa to be training with them tomorrow. They had a day off yesterday, did the squad, because they had a pre-season friendly over the weekend, which Wissa was not involved in. One source, though, has told Sky Sports News that Wissa has got no intention of playing for Brentford again because he wants to move to Newcastle United. He wants both of these clubs to come together and finalise this move so he can get what he perceives to be a dream transfer to play Champions League football at the age of 28, going on 29. He feels he won't get that opportunity again. Look, earlier on in this transfer window, there seemed to be an insistence that this player was not for sale. However, what we're hearing now is that Brentford may do business on Yoane Wissa, provided they can bring in an adequate replacement. They don't want to lose Brian Mbeumo, who's gone to Manchester United, and Yoane Wissa in the same transfer window unless they bring in players who are going to be able to adequately replace them. That is not easy given what they did for that club in the last couple of seasons. Brentford are looking at players. Amari Hutchinson is one from Ipswich Town, and they are looking at a number of other strikers. But as far as they are concerned, they don't want to sell Wissa, but you just keep getting the impression now that has this gone too far for Wissa to be able to play for the club again? And if so, then Brentford are going to need to want to get the best possible deal that they can. If that comes from Newcastle United, all well and good. Newcastle get the man they want, Wissa gets the move he wants, and then Brentford, for their whole role in this, will hopefully, for their sake, get the transfer fee that they want, to be able to reinvest that, to be able to get that adequate replacement that they'd be after.
But James, if Isak leaves Newcastle and Wissa goes to Newcastle, Newcastle still needs someone else, surely.
You think so, because Callum Wilson left at the end of the season. He had 5 years there, 5 injury hit years, but for one time he did compete for that number 9 shirt with Alexander Isak. They really are limited in options there right now. You'd have to say that Alexander Isak, having not trained with the first team, even if he stays at Newcastle in this transfer window, there's plenty of time left in this window. You wouldn't think he'd be ready for the start of the season. So there's an argument that Newcastle, if Alexander Isak leaves, needs to sign two strikers. Even if he stays, they probably need to sign at least one, you'd say. And Yoane Wissa is one that makes sense when you consider what he's done over the course of the last few seasons at Brentford. They're in a really difficult spot, Newcastle, right now, because there's a huge amount of enthusiasm about being back in the Champions League. They had a number of very lean transfer windows where they had to be very quiet when it came to incomings to fit within PSR. Last summer they did things they didn't want to do to fit within PSR and avoid breaching Premier League rules. Elliot Addison, the homegrown talent, they were desperate not to sell him. They let him go. Yankuba Minteh, they were so excited about him playing in a Newcastle shirt. He didn't even play for Newcastle. He went to Brighton in the end, having not featured for the club, having been on loan with Arne Slot at final the season before. So for Newcastle, having had so much enthusiasm about this summer and what they could do with money to spend, so far Anthony Elanga is the only senior player through the door. Very exciting, but it's not quite been the summer they wanted. Aaron Ramsdale there too was potentially a number 2, or could come in as a number 1. But things don't look great right now at Newcastle, despite the fact on paper not a huge amount has changed in terms of that squad.
It must be frustrating. I think Newcastle United fans are frustrated. The club is frustrated because their takeover happened at a time when there are rules prohibiting clubs from spending too much more than what they're bringing in.
Old money protecting itself.
Well, the issue they've got is, we know about the rules. It's a rolling 3-year PSR system whereby you can't make more than £105 million worth of losses. Now, to do that, you need the revenue to go up. Now, Newcastle United will argue, well, some of these other clubs who have found their base and have been able to buy lots of players, they could do that when these rules weren't in place. Now Newcastle United do have these rules in place, arguably the richest club in the world, and they can't spend the money that they would like to. James mentioned that Elanga has come in. Great signing, but they were wanting to bring in, spending in excess of 100 to 200 million pounds in this transfer window, which they can so easily do, but because of the rules, they can't. So what they have to do is do it organically, and that's what they're trying to do. Shirt sponsorship deals, marketing, increase revenue, trying to qualify for the Champions League every season. They are in the Champions League this season, so they will feel the benefit of that. But if they can't continue to bring in the players that they want, to be able to maintain that place in the top 4 or the top 5, then they might drop out of the Champions League in future years, and then that source of revenue is gone. So it's going to be difficult for them to do, but there is a way for them to do it, is to increase that revenue, which historically the other clubs have managed to do. If you look at way before Manchester City and Chelsea and the likes of Manchester United, Arsenal and Liverpool, they went and got their global reach with hundreds of thousands of fans from all over the world. That's why they managed to.
But then the rules changed. But then changed the rule. That's what I mean about old money taking care of itself.
That's Newcastle United. That's the route they have to take at this moment in time while these rules are in place.
Yeah. All right. I'm glad you mentioned Liverpool there, because I want to talk Alexander Isak. James, we spotted him today. Well, we spotted his car and him in it. Where are we with him?
Yeah, he's been at the Newcastle training ground today. We understand he was there for around 3 hours, and it comes after he had his own personal training camp in Spain at his old club, Real Sociedad, and it comes in the days that have followed Liverpool putting in a bid to Newcastle, a bid worth more than £100 million. That was rejected. We understand that Isak was receiving treatment on a thigh injury. None of the first team players were there because they're still recovering from their trip to South Korea. Newcastle, they do not want to sell him in this transfer window. They value him at £150 million. We're waiting to see if Liverpool come back in with another offer. It was really interesting to hear from Eddie Howe before they left South Korea. Some comments he made just before he left. He said, "You have to earn the right to train with us. The player has a responsibility to be part of a team and part of a squad. You have to act in the right way." And this comes after Isak told Newcastle last month he'd like to explore his options in this transfer window. Newcastle will not let Alexander Isak go unless they have a replacement lined up. And that is why the deal with Benjamin Sesko, whether he goes to Newcastle, whether he goes to Manchester United, whether he stays at RB Leipzig, whether he goes elsewhere, is so significant when it comes to Alexander Isak as well.
All right, let's talk a possible replacement then. We know that, as Darmish said, Newcastle interested in Benjamin Sesko. What's going on with Yoane Wissa?
This one is pretty unsavoury at the moment, but as far as Brentford are concerned, they're expecting Yoane Wissa to be training tomorrow with the rest of the squad. They've had a day off today, they had a pre-season friendly over the weekend. They're back in training tomorrow. However, one source has told us at Sky Sports News that Wissa himself has got no intention of playing for Brentford again. He wants Brentford and Newcastle to come together and finalise this deal where he will get what he perceives as his dream move from Brentford to Newcastle United. Look, earlier in this transfer window, there was an insistence almost from Brentford that this player is not for sale. However, that goalpost seems to have moved ever so slightly because we think Brentford would do business on Yoane Wissa, provided, it is a big proviso, admittedly, that they bring in a suitable replacement. They do not want to be in a position where Brian Mbeumo leaves Brentford and Yoane Wissa leaves Brentford in the same transfer window. Replacing that amount of goals and what they bring to the team is going to be so difficult. They are, however, looking at other targets. Amari Hutchinson is a player that they've been trying to sign for the entire transfer window from Ipswich Town, and there are other targets that they are looking at in the case that Yoane Wissa was to leave.
Is Darwin Núñez going to leave Liverpool?
If you're a betting man, I think you suggest that it's probably likely, but in terms of what he's doing right now, he's starting for Liverpool at Anfield in the first of two pre-season matches against Athletic Club, and 2 minutes ago he scored at Anfield for Liverpool. Now, AC Milan have made an initial approach to Liverpool for Darwin. They're trying to sign him. Contact has now been made between the clubs. There's been interest from clubs in Italy. There's been interest from clubs in Saudi Arabia as well. AC Milan yet to make an offer. There are clubs like Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia who I think would love to sign him. We understand, though, that his preference would be to move to Spain or to a club in Europe rather than move to the Saudi Pro League at this point in his career. Al Hilal, they've yet to make a bid. Important to state here, he's still got 3 years left in his contract. The deal he signed when Liverpool signed him, it could rise to £85 million. So you understand they want to make some decent money on a player who I think it's likely they'll make a loss on. If they are to sign Alexander Isak, you'd think he becomes third choice striker. I think his days are now numbered. I don't think Liverpool wanted to sell Luis Diaz. I think Arne Slot's probably looked at Darwin Núñez. Yes, he scored some important goals from last season, but does he fit into that picture? Will he get the minutes with Hugo Ekitike there now? We wait to see.